Hi everyone, welcome back to another history lesson with me, Miss Horn. Thanks for coming back and joining me. So today we are going to tackle World War II. All right. So World War II, we're going to chunk into two parts, and we're going to start with one major thing, and that is adding to how Hitler got his rise of power. So we talked the other day about this rise of dictators. Well, how did Hitler actually get to do it? Well, there were a few goals that Hitler had put in place for Nazi Germany. One was the Aryan goal that we talked about, that pure Germans with the blonde hair, blue eyes that were tall and strong, they were going to create the Third Reich based on this Aryan goal of the perfect race. And he did this by using his SS, his secret police. He also ran concentration camps that had two major principles: terror and ideology. And the ideology would go back to the Aryan goal. So, one of the ways that Hitler was able to do this is he made Joseph Goebbels a propaganda minister within the government of Nazi Germany. And his only goal was to spin the truth and use any means necessary to convince the German people of the Nazi ideology. So he turned out movies, newspapers, posters, slogans. He used loudspeakers in parks, had mass rallies, and he believed that if you say something often enough, people will believe it. And guess what? People began to believe it. Does this sound kind of familiar, y'all? It should. So this firmly establishes Germany as anti-Semitic, and that means just anti-Jewish. And they went even further with this by establishing the Nuremberg Laws, and these was passed in 1935. It basically said that Jewish people were not allowed to be German citizens, they were not allowed to marry German citizens, and they had to wear a yellow Star of David and carry around ID cards with them. If they had a German passport, they had to surrender it immediately. Immediately. And tensions between Jewish people and Germans had reached such a pinnacle that on November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht would happen. And Kristallnacht is German for Night of Shattered Glass. This is where Nazis would destroy Jewish businesses and homes. And they sent many Jews to concentration camps. And those who remained were forced to clean up the destruction, and they were not allowed in public places. Those who remained also had to go live in ghettos. So this is Goebbels himself, doesn't even fit the Aryan race description, but whatever. What do I know? And guess what? Neither does Hitler. But, if you're the man in charge, you don't have to live by your own expectations. But this is an example of German propaganda, strong men, right? This is, German propaganda for the women. Yeah, so let's talk about this path to World War II for a second. So we know that World War II officially begins on September 1st, 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland. And with this, you have Lightning War, or the Blitzkrieg. And that Hitler used this shock and awe, like take your enemy by surprise technique, to conquer Poland in just 4 weeks. And he did this with armored tanks and air support. You also had the Menin, I can't pronounce it right now, y'all. This line that was created that was concrete and steel fortifications that were built by the French. And in May 1940, Germans attacked this through Belgium and Luxembourg and was able to take the French and British by surprise. Germans would actually trap the Allied forces around Dunkirk, which was on the coast. And luckily, the British Navy was able to come and evacuate them. But it would take 9 days for that evacuation to actually be complete. On June 22nd, 1940, France signed a ceasefire agreement, an armistice, and Germany directly controlled most of France because of that, and they set up, a puppet government called the Vichy to govern the rest. So this is the Maginot Line. Minot line. There we go. Finally get it out. So you had strong fortifications on the direct German border, but they had weak ones along Luxembourg and Belgium, which, I mean, in hindsight, y'all, you should have seen that one coming. But what do I know? So then after Germany and Hitler were able to take over France, they set their eyes on Great Britain. Well, Great Britain knew that they were next, and so they kept appealing to the United States, but the United States was very much an isolationist. They wanted to stay out of it. So instead of being directly involved, what we decide to do is start sending, supplies to Britain and France to help them without actually fighting with them. In August of 1940, that's when Hitler began bombing Great Britain. And he started by bombing the British airfields and factories. British retaliated. They were like, dude, if you're going to bomb us, we're going to bomb you. So they bombed Berlin. And this made Hitler very mad. Very mad. Thus, he switched to from bombing just military installations to now bombing London, bombing civilians. And this allowed the British to actually rebuild the Royal Air Force so that they were able to gain control of the airspace over Britain. And when he realized that he couldn't beat Britain, then he decided to go after Russia, the USSR, even though he had only just signed, 5 years earlier or 2 years earlier, this agreement with Russia, with Stalin, that he would stay out of Russia. But he got upset and wanted to take it out on somebody. So he did the dumb thing. He basically followed Napoleon's footsteps. I wonder if he took a page from Napoleon's playbook, but wasn't smart enough to read the ending. Whatever. So Hitler planned the attack for the spring of 1941, but it was actually delayed until August. The Germans would be successful at first, but this would pull the Soviets into the war. And the Germans realized that they were unable to cope with the Russian winter. So these are images of the Battle of Britain. They basically leveled London. One thing that I should add about the attack on the Soviet Union is the same thing that happened with Napoleon happened with Hitler, is that they went in August, was planning on not being there that long, and they got stuck. So this brings us to December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy. This is when the Japanese made the stupid decision of attacking the US at Pearl Harbor. Technically, Hawaii wasn't a state yet, but because of this, Hawaii would become a state. Now, I should also mention that the Japanese not only attacked here, but because they did attack other European colonies, but this one would be the most damaging for the Japanese. The Japanese thought that the American naval fleet in the Pacific, would hinder Japanese imperialism, hinder their takeover of the Southeast Pacific and Southeast Asia. So they wanted to destroy the American fleet. They thought that the U.S. wouldn't respond because they thought the U.S. was weak. And this act basically unified the U.S. unified the U.S. with the Allied side. And they would officially declare war on the Japanese and on Germany because you know what? If we're going to do it, We're going to go all out, y'all. One of the most famous speeches was by President Franklin D. Roosevelt after this, basically saying that December 17th, 1941 is a date which will live in infamy. The surprise attack by the Japanese on Pearl Harbor began at 7:55 a.m. Hawaii time under a clear sky. Perfect conditions for the swarms of Japanese fighter pilots to drop their bombs. The images from that day are apocalyptic. Battleships obliterated, planes destroyed, smoke, flames. The next day, as the images of the carnage that killed 2,403 American men, women, and children spread throughout the world, Roosevelt declared war on Japan. Not long after, Italy and Germany declared war on the United States. The world was at war, and America was now in it. So we immediately declare war on Japan. We haven't even gotten involved in the European, theater of things. We are just focusing on the Pacific because we have a direct response. We've been poked, right? So as a result of this, one of the things that you may not know is Roosevelt thought that he was doing a good thing by establishing Japanese internment camps. These were basically camps. They were concentration camps. They rounded up the Japanese and Japanese Americans, or anybody who may look Asian, Japanese, and sent them to camps all over the United States for their own safety. Yeah. Not the greatest moment in American history. Another dark moment in World War II is the Bataan Death March. In 1942, Japan controlled all of Southeast and East Asia. And so the US, eventually surrenders the Philippines. And so the Death March happened because US and Filipino soldiers who were captured, they were also beaten as they marched to a prison camp. 70,000 prisoners marched, and not all of them were US soldiers. And many of them believed that they were marching to their death. Now, I should also say that the United States had a very effective secret weapon in all of this. Native Americans played a huge role in helping to turn the tide of the war to the Allies. And that was because the Native Americans used their native languages to communicate war messages to the Allies. This is something that the Germans and the Axis powers couldn't figure out. We were able to break their message or their coding, but they were not able to crack ours. It's kind of fascinating. African Americans would also play a significant role in World War II. You would have many regiments that were on the ground fighting. You also had the Tuskegee Airmen. These were very well-trained airmen from Tuskegee University and Howard University. They were the first to have the training as civilians, and there were 445 Tuskegee Airmen in World War II, and only 150 would be killed. They would become highly decorated and become an instrumental part in, fighting the British, or not fighting the British, fighting the Germans rather, like very instrumental. So the fighting continues in Europe. We know that it doesn't end until 1945. US, Great Britain, and the USSR put aside their political difference because they now have a common enemy. They required unconditional surrender of the Axis powers, all of them. Stalin was actually screaming at the US and Britain to open up two fronts, have the Eastern Front and have the Western Front, because Stalin knew that Hitler could not fight a war on two sides. And so that's what happens. Then in 1942, Germany's Rommel, the Desert Fox, was able to use the African Corps to control Egypt. And they were hoping to cut off the oil to the Allies, but British forces were fortunate enough to be able to stop Rommel. Um, and so this is why it's, called a world war. So one of the major turning points of World War II was the Battle of Stalingrad. So the major turning point in World War II for the European front was the Battle of Stalingrad. So in 1942 to 1943, Germany was hoping to invade this industrial center, a major one for Russia, but they weren't expecting the Russians to be well prepared. Germany sent in their best army and they lost. They had to surrender. It was a major defeat that would give the Allies the hope it needed to continue pushing forward. Hitler actually commanded that army to fight until the last soldier was standing. He was furious when he heard that they had surrendered and made it a national day of mourning when he found out. Oh, he was not happy at all. So this is actually a Russian piece of propaganda that's the death to fascism. I love it. It's so awesome. And then you have D-Day. D-Day doesn't actually stand for anything. D-Day just means this is the day we're going. So this is June 6, 1944. This is when the Allies made the largest amphibious attack on an enemy. And amphibious just basically means by sea. And they landed on Normandy Beach in France. And it was commanded by Dwight D. Eisenhower, an eventual president. The Allies did this in hopes of freeing Paris, which they were able to do in 1944. And then they continued their strike and pushing the Germans into Germany, which they were successful of doing in 1945. Resistance fighters in Germany actually joined the Allies and helped them push the Germans back into Germany. Now, in April of 1945, the Soviets were the ones to enter Berlin first. And this, is kind of where this eventually leads to the Cold War. And Hitler is at his eagle's nest. This is the Führer bunker that is underground in the heart of Germany. And this is where he's suspected to have committed suicide on April 30th, 1945. And his men burned his body because they didn't want the Soviets and they didn't want the Allies, period, to be able to have his body. That's the reason why I say suspected. Because who knows? The German commanders were then forced to surrender, and they surrendered officially on May 7th, 1945, and this is called VE Day. Now, VE actually stands for Victory in Europe Day, because we're not finished. World War II is not officially over, because we still got the Japanese fighting in the Pacific Ocean. So this is what D-Day actually looked like, and it was pretty stinking rough. I'm not gonna lie on that one. And these are the VE Day celebrations. I love the heading of this newspaper: Nazis give up. All right, so next time we are going to pick up with the second part, the end of World War II, and we're going to talk about the Holocaust. I'll see y'all later.